can't just decide to drop a bad habit. Your brain fights back. But once you understand the neuroscience, breaking it gets surprisingly simple. Because willpower isn't the problem. Your brain is. Specifically, a small loop wired deep inside it that treats your habit as survival. And every time you try to quit through sheer effort, you're fighting that loop head-on. That's why it feels impossible. That's why you snap back within days. That's why just stop has never worked, for anyone, ever. But there's a different way in. A quieter way. One that works with your brain instead of against it. And once you see how the machinery actually runs, the habit loosens on its own. So let's start where every habit lives. A small structure near the center of your brain called the basal ganglia. This is your brain's autopilot system. It stores routines so your conscious mind doesn't have to think about them. Brushing your teeth, driving a familiar route, reaching for your phone the second you feel bored, all stored there. The basal ganglia doesn't judge whether a habit is good or bad. It only cares whether it's repeated. Repetition equals safety. Safety equals keep it. That's the first thing to understand. Your brain is not trying to sabotage you. It's trying to save energy. Every habit you have was built because it once produced a reward, even a small one. And that reward triggered dopamine. Dopamine is often called the pleasure chemical, but that's not quite right. It's actually the anticipation chemical. It doesn't spike when you get the reward. It spikes just before, when your brain predicts the reward is coming. That's why the pull toward a habit feels stronger than the habit itself. The urge is dopamine. The action is just clean up. Now here's where most people go wrong. They try to break the habit by removing the action, putting the phone in another room, throwing out the snacks, deleting the app. That works for about 3 days. Then the loop finds another way in. Because you didn't touch the loop. You only touched the ending. To actually break a habit, you have to understand its 3 parts: the cue, the routine, and the reward. The cue is the trigger, a time of day, an emotion, a place, a person, a feeling of boredom or stress. The routine is the behavior itself: scrolling, snacking at someone, pouring the drink. The reward is what your brain gets out of it: relief, distraction, a hit of stimulation, a break from discomfort. Your brain doesn't crave the routine. It craves the reward. The routine is just the shortcut it learned. Which means if you want to break the habit, you don't attack the middle. You work the edges. Start with the cue. Most people can't even name theirs. For the next few days, don't try to change anything. Just notice. When does the urge appear? What just happened right before? Was it a feeling, a place, a time, a specific thought? Naming the cue is half the work. Because the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for conscious decisions, can only intervene in what it can see. An invisible cue runs on autopilot. A named cue becomes a choice point. And this is where the next layer comes in, the part almost no one talks about. Every time you resist the habit, you're not just fighting a behavior, you're fighting a prediction error. Your brain expected the reward. It didn't get it. That mismatch creates a small stress spike, a rise in cortisol, the stress hormone. That's the discomfort you feel when you try to quit. It isn't weakness, it's chemistry. And here's the trap. If you sit in that discomfort with no plan, your brain will eventually route you back to the old habit just to make the discomfort stop. So the answer isn't to endure the urge, it's to redirect it. This is where neuroplasticity comes in. Your brain's ability to rewire itself based on what you repeat. You can't delete a habit. The neural pathway is already there. But you can build a new pathway right next to it and let the old one weaken from disuse. The trick is to keep the same cue and the same reward, but swap the routine in the middle. If the cue is stress and the reward is relief, don't try to want stress less. Give your brain a new route to relief. A 90-second walk, cold water on your face, 3 slow exhales, longer than the inhales, a quick text to someone you like. Small, boring, doable. Because the brain doesn't need a better habit, it needs a substitute that delivers a version of the same reward. Do this 10 times and the new pathway starts to hold. Do it 50 times and it starts to feel automatic. That's neuroplasticity working in your favor for once, instead of against you. But there's one more piece, and this is the piece that separates the people who break the habit from the ones who almost do. It's the environment. Your basal ganglia is deeply tied to context. The same room, the same chair, the same time of night. These are all cues, even if you don't feel them. If the environment stays the same, the habit stays alive under the surface, waiting. That's why people who quit successfully almost always change something physical. They move the chair, they change the route, they put the phone on the other side of the room, they shower at a different time. You're not being dramatic, you're breaking the associative wiring your brain built between that place and that behavior. Change the setting, and the loop loses its footing. And here's a quiet truth most self-help content skips. You will not feel like a new person for a while. For the first 2 or 3 weeks, your brain still runs the old prediction. It still expects the reward. The urge still shows up. What changes first isn't the craving. It's your response time to the craving. You start noticing it a little earlier. You pause a half second longer. You choose the new route slightly more often than the old one. That's the real signal of change, not the absence of the urge, but a growing gap between the urge and the action. Neuroscience calls this response inhibition, and it strengthens the prefrontal cortex the same way lifting strengthens a muscle, slowly, quietly, with repetition. And here's something worth sitting with. The habit you're trying to break isn't your enemy. It's an old solution to an old problem your brain hasn't been given a new answer to yet. Give it a better answer in the same shape at the same moment, and it will take it. Brains are lazy in the best way. They pick the path of least resistance, make the new path easier than the old one, even by a small margin, and the switch begins. That's why the people who break habits for good rarely rely on motivation. They rely on design. They shape their environment. They name their cues. They pre-decide their substitutes. They lower the friction on the new behavior and raise it on the old one. And they stop treating the urge as a moral failure. It's just a signal, a prediction, a ping from an older version of you asking for the reward it used to get. You don't have to obey the ping. You just have to answer it differently. So if there's one thing to take from all of this, let it be this. You don't break a habit by force. You break it by understanding the loop and redesigning one piece of it at a time. Name the cue, keep the reward, change the routine, move the setting, repeat until the new path is smoother than the old one. That's it. That's the whole mechanism. No willpower marathon, no white-knuckle vow at midnight, no starting over every Monday. Just a small, honest series of choices that rewire the machinery underneath. And if you're sitting there right now thinking of the habit you'd most like to loosen, notice something. The fact that you're still thinking about it means the loop hasn't won. It just hasn't been redesigned yet. Which one will you start with? The cue, the routine, or the environment? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and there's usually a pattern worth seeing. If this made the loop feel less mysterious, you'll want the next one on how dopamine quietly shapes almost every decision you make in a day. It pairs with this one perfectly. And if you want more of this, calm, practical brain habits every week, no hype, no BS, subscribe and turn on notifications so the next one lands when it's ready. Because the brain that built the habit is the same brain that can quietly unbuild it. You just have to stop fighting it and start speaking its language.